What's up, y'all? Jake here, about to go over a core and hips routine. Should take about 20 minutes. All we need is a comfy spot on the floor and a pillow. Let's get into it. Starting in a sideline position, shoulders and hips are stacked on top of each other, straight from head to toe. Bottom arms punching out, top arms pulling back for tension. We will start with that top knee driving up towards the chest as high as we can. Once we get up tall, we're going to stay close to the chest with that knee, lift away from the floor, and then we scrape that heel back behind us towards the ceiling, slowly lowering the whole leg down to the ground, and then we reverse. The low back will want to help and compensate a lot during this movement. One cue I like is to think about our belt buckle, or if we had a belt buckle, we want to keep it square and facing forward. We don't want to tilt it up like we were going to read it, or we don't want to tilt it down towards our feet. Try to minimize the movement through the low back. Once we've completed 4 reps, we'll have a cool transition and swing over to the other side. Same thing, straight line, shoulders and hips stacked. We build tension with the upper body, and we get right into it. Knee drives up towards the chest. We keep it close as we lift away, and we transition back. Drive behind us, open away from the floor, and then pull the knee to the armpit, close the door, lowering. The yoga ball behind the knee is there for me to squeeze and to build more tension with that working leg. Definitely not necessary, but it's a cool tool. If you don't have a fancy yoga ball, a rolled up hand towel works just as well. Finishing our 4th and final rep. That hip might be burning a little bit. Right after this, we are going to transition onto our tabletop position. Shoulders will be over our hands, hips over our knees, arms straight. Belt buckle is tilted down towards the floor, so our belly button is jutting down. Head is looking up, spinal extension. From here, we will start segmentally moving into flexion. So piece by piece, we're going to start to scoop the tailbone under and work our way up the spine, trying to arch our back, engaging our abdominals on the front side to do this. We've hit maximal flexion. We will start to untuck the tailbone, and then we extend from the low back and we work our way up the spine, finishing with the neck. Think of it almost as like a spinal wave, right? Moving one piece at a time. Tension really helps, so pushing the arms into the floor, knees driving into the ground, and a couple compensations to look for. Whenever we do this, the hips will want to shoot back towards the feet sometimes, or we'll want to lean forward over those hands. Try to stay stacked. Pro tip, film yourself sometime from the side doing this, and you can see when you want to compensate and want to shift, or where the spine wants to move in big chunks. Now we're going to start with the head, flexing forward, tucking the chin, driving the hands into the floor. We arch the upper back. We work our way down the spine, scooping the tailbone under at the end, and then we transition. The head looks up, Proud chest extending through the upper back, and we work our way down, extending, untucking the tailbone. Tuck the chin, arms driving into the floor, pressing that upper back towards the ceiling. Arch, arch, arch. Here we go, standing Jefferson curls, 6 reps. We have a slight bend in the knees, and then we segmentally fold forward until we find a good stretch at the hamstrings at the bottom, and then we drive the feet into the floor, stacking our vertebrae up one piece at a time, coming back to the start. So right here, I'm folding forward, keeping that slight bend, engaging my abdominals, and then I've got my belt buckle tucked, so I'm reading it, my tailbone scooped under, and I maintain that as I drive into the floor, stacking back up, keeping that rounded spine until I get all the way up. The next rep begins with the chin tucking, and then you work your way down through the upper back rounding, like you're doing a mini crunch, driving the fists to the floor. Also, make sure you keep the weight kind of in the balls of your feet. Don't want to lean too far back onto your heels. Try to stay balanced during this whole movement. And it's also okay to let the knees lock out once you become nice and tall at this position. The goal of this exercise right now is to try to move every little piece of that spine. So it helps to keep a pretty slow tempo. Work at your own pace. And if you ever get fatigued during these reps, you can always pause or call it for this exercise. Listen to your body during these reps. Looking for a good stretch in the hamstrings at this bottom position, and then pressing into the floor, stacking yourself back up, keeping that spine rounded until the very end, nice and tall. Getting back up to the top, finish with a little bit of extension, and then last rep, best rep, tuck the chin, folding forward, rounding that spine one piece at a time, working your way down, keeping those knees slightly bent. Find that good stretch in the hamstrings at the bottom, and then you drive the feet into the floor, keeping that tailbone scooped under so that spine is rounded as you stack back up. Get nice and tall, and then we'll transition. We go onto the floor, seated, crunched forwards, and we're going to try to round the spine as much as possible by engaging the abdominals. From here, we're going to slowly lower, trying to paste one piece of the spine onto the ground at a time, working our way up. The last thing touching is our head, and then we will reverse, tuck in the chin, roll the shoulder blades, Upper back comes off the floor, mid back, peeling that low back one piece at a time, crunching at the very top, as much rounding in the spine, see if we can get a stretch, and then continue on into the next repetition. A couple ways we can manipulate this exercise is by straightening the legs out to make it more difficult. We can also make it more challenging or easier depending on the arm placement. If we were to bring the arms more overhead, away from our legs, that longer lever point would make it a lot tougher to lower down, more tension on the abs. Vice versa, you bring the hands closer to the legs, you have more of that counterbalance. During the last portion of that crunch with the low back, it really helps to try to scoop the pelvis under, read the belt buckle, and hold that, especially lowering down as well. Engage those lower abdominals so you can lower down one piece at a time. We want smooth peanut butter, not chunky today. If you've been going nice and slow, the abs should be cooking here at this point. Keep using those legs, dig the heels into the floor for more tension, more control. Arms are locked out, driving forward. Super slow, last rep, own it. One piece at a time, lowering down, very slow. And then reverse it. Arms locked out, driving those fists forward in front of you, peeling off the ground. Remaining on the floor, we can catch our breath. We got segmental bridges, 6 reps, keeping our knees bent and that posterior pelvic tilt so we can read our belt buckle. The tailbone scoops up, and then we slowly start to peel ourselves away from the floor, working from that low back up as high as we can to the upper back without losing the posterior pelvic tilt. And then we slowly start to reverse that movement, and we lower our back down one piece at a time, finishing with the tailbone. And then we reset into the second rep. One thing to be aware of, you won't be able to bridge up as high, keeping that posterior pelvic tilt. So you might hit a limitation or a stretch in the quads. We can also use tension to get more out of this exercise. What I mean by that is the arms can drive into the floor, the legs drive those feet into the ground for more tension, and we can focus on getting more effort out of those abs, controlling the movement. Squeeze those glutes and hamstrings at that top position, and then maintain the tension as we slowly lower, one piece at a time, no big chunks. Control the movement, and then engage and drive up for this last rep, best rep. All right, and now we have hamstring stretches, 10 reps each side. We'll start folding forward in the standing position, knees slightly bent, If you're limited and can't touch the floor, you can use blocks or a chair. Adjust the height of the objects that works best for you. And then we're going to work one leg at a time, extending the knee, creating a stretch in the hamstrings while the other leg stays bent, if not even more bend in the knee. We're going to alternate sides, going back and forth, and we're going to target a big stretch in the hamstrings on the straightened leg. Here we go. 10 reps each side. And notice when we do the extension, we don't want the hips swaying too much from side to side. We want to kind of stay stacked over our feet. So look out for that compensation of swaying the hips from side to side. And if you notice there's too big of a stretch in the back of the leg, you can always come a little bit out of this forward fold position to help reduce the intensity. Always working in pain-free range of motion. Once we've completed our 10 repetitions, we will slowly stand back up nice and tall. And then we will transition to the floor. We have our seated position here with legs straight out in front, keeping upper body tall. And we work one leg at a time, raising and lowering over the object slowly and controlled. We don't want the low back to start to round. Lots of quad and hip flexor getting worked to raise and lower over that block. It also might help to lean against a wall for support if you really notice that low back wanting to round or tuck under. Hands are out to the side, driving into the ground for support. Just re-emphasizing too, we want to keep that knee as straight as possible. So all the work is happening at that hip flexor and the quad. After finishing rep number 8, we'll slide the block over to the outside of the opposite leg and continue our 8 reps on the other side. A note for future workouts, if you ever want to increase or progress this exercise, you could always try to lean the torso closer to the legs or being more upright to challenge the hip flexor. And you can also bring the block further away from the midline, which would have to activate more of those abductors or the outside of the hip. Another way to make this a little bit harder. Giving those quads and abs a little breather, we go back to our tabletop or quadruped position. We have pelvic tilts. Shoulders stacked over our hands, hips over our knees. The goal of this exercise is to tuck and untuck the tailbone while keeping the rest of the body nice and still. It's a very subtle movement. Spill that belt buckle down towards the ground and then engage those lower abdominals, arch the low back so you can read that belt buckle, and then transition, extend through the low back, tilt the belt buckle down towards the ground. Alternating back and forth, 10 reps total. Tension with the arms driving into the floor. Finishing up those pelvic tilts, we will transition. Standing back up nice and tall, we'll have a stagger stance. So pick a working leg that will be out in front and it'll be slightly bent. Other leg is out to the side and it's there for stability and balance. From the stagger stance, we will hip hinge forward and perform two different movements. We will go back to the pelvic tilts, specifically trying to find a stretch in that hamstring and then a stretch in the low back. After 5 repetitions of the pelvic tilts on this right leg, we will start to work closed chain, internal and external rotation for the hip. All that means is we're going to keep that lower leg glued to the ground, and then we're going to rotate the pelvis around that upper leg. So our upper leg is staying still right here, and we're going to twist that pelvis and the upper body around it, trying to find a stretch in that hip capsule. So whenever I look away, I find a good stretch in the inside groin area, and then when I turn towards that working leg, I find the stretch deep on the backside in that butt and glute. You can also use your hands for a little bit of assistance to pull yourself into that stretch. Remember, work pain-free range of motion. If you've never done this before, start slow, and you can always use a wall for support. Starting the work on the opposite leg, you can see how I shift my weight over to that lead leg. That back leg is just there for a little bit of support and balance. Transitioning to internal and external rotation. Remember, we really want to keep that working leg fixed so that knee stays over the toes, that upper leg stays still, and our body and our pelvis is rotating around our upper leg to create the stretch. Take your time through this exercise and feel the stretch. Hold that for a second or two before transitioning out. Wrapping up and slowly come out of that hinged position. Almost done. Last exercise. We have our windshield wipers, 5 reps laying on the ground. Flex the hips 90 degrees and the knees 90 degrees. And from here, we will rotate. Keeping our upper back glued to the floor, we're going to slowly lower our legs to one side as much as we can. Controlling this movement with our obliques and our abs. We don't want the opposite shoulder to ever peel off the ground. The upper body stays glued to the floor, and we're rotating through that low back. Remember, this should be pain-free range of motion, and we're targeting those obliques and abdominals. We're almost done with this workout. We're wrapping up, but if you fatigue before finishing, feel free to stop ahead of time. That's totally fine. Finishing this last rep, best rep yet. Just want to say thanks, guys and gals, for sticking with me and knocking this out. Hopefully those abs feel like they've been worked and those hips feel nice and smooth. Thanks again for staying with me. See you next time.